3 men vanished from the most secure prison in American history. No bodies, no confirmed sightings, no answers. The FBI investigated for 17 years, spent millions of dollars, interviewed hundreds of witnesses across multiple countries. And after all of that, officially, they concluded the men probably drowned. Probably. In 1962, Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin walked out of Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, nicknamed The Rock. The prison that was designed from the ground up to be completely, utterly, mathematically impossible to escape from. And nobody has ever definitively proven what happened to them. This is the story of Alcatraz, the island fortress built on fear and the audacious escape that may or may not have succeeded. To understand why the 1962 escape is so extraordinary, you first need to understand what Alcatraz actually was. In 1775, Spanish explorer Juan Manuel de Ayala was mapping the San Francisco Bay when he came across a small rocky island teeming with pelicans. He named it Isla de los Alcatrazes, Island of the Pelicans. The name stuck, more or less. Today we just call it Alcatraz. The island is 1.25 miles offshore from San Francisco. That doesn't sound like much. But the bay surrounding it is treacherous. Water temperatures average between 50 and 54 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. The currents are some of the most unpredictable and powerful on the entire Pacific coast. And fog blankets the bay so frequently that even experienced sailors treat it with deep respect. The US Army saw all of this as a feature, not a bug. In the mid-1800s, the military built a fortress on the island, guns pointed outward, to protect San Francisco Bay. But as the decades passed, the military found another use for it, housing its most dangerous prisoners, Civil War deserters, prisoners of war, men the government didn't quite know what to do with. By 1934, the federal government had a new problem. Prohibition had just ended, but in its wake came an era of organized crime. Gangsters like Al Capone were household names. Prison escapes were rampant. Public confidence in the justice system was eroding. The answer? Take the toughest prisoners, the ones who escaped from other prisons, the ringleaders, the manipulators, the most dangerous men in the system, and put them somewhere they could never leave. Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary officially opened on August 11th, 1934. Alcatraz was engineered differently from other prisons. Everything was a system. Every system had a backup. The prison held a maximum of around 300 inmates at any one time, a deliberately small population. Why? Because fewer inmates meant more staff per prisoner, more eyes, more control. Guards conducted head counts every 30 minutes, not every hour, not twice a day, every 30 minutes around the clock. If a prisoner wasn't in their exact spot, sleeping, eating, working, an alarm went off. The cells themselves were small, roughly 5 by 9 feet. A cot, a toilet, a sink. No room to hide tools, no room to organize, no room to plan, or so they thought. Inmates at Alcatraz were given 4 basic rights: food, clothing, shelter, and medical care. Everything else, library access, recreation time, work assignments, had to be earned. Good behavior unlocked privileges. Bad behavior stripped them away. Among the most famous names to pass through Alcatraz's gates, Al Scarface Capone, who actually found the rigid structure harder to manage than the other prisons he'd been in. Machine Gun Kelly. Robert Stroud, the so-called Birdman of Alcatraz, though he actually kept his birds in a different prison. The nickname was Cinematic License. For most inmates, Alcatraz wasn't about being punished more severely. It was about being controlled more completely. Between 1934 and 1963, there were 14 recorded escape attempts involving 36 prisoners. The official record: 23 recaptured, 6 shot and killed during the attempt, 2 drowned, and here's where it gets interesting: 5 listed as missing and presumed drowned. Presumed, that word again. Some attempts were almost comically desperate. In 1941, Joe Kretzer and 3 others took several guards hostage and tried to blast their way out. They were recaptured within hours. In 1945, a prisoner managed to get off the island. He disguised himself as a US Army sergeant, bluffed his way onto a military launch, and actually made it to the mainland. He was recaptured the next day, but the audacity of the plan became legendary within the walls. In 1962, a prisoner swam all the way from the island to the shore, a genuinely remarkable physical feat given the cold water and fierce currents. He was caught, exhausted, on the rocks near the Golden Gate Bridge. And then there was 1962, the big one. Frank Morris was not your average prisoner. He had an IQ reportedly in the top 2% of the population. He'd been in and out of institutions since childhood, and at every stop, he had either escaped or attempted to. Alcatraz was supposed to be where that story ended. John and Clarence Anglin were brothers from a large farming family in Georgia. They'd robbed banks together, escaped from other facilities together, and ended up on the Rock together. Their loyalty to each other was absolute. The fourth member of the group was Allen West, a career criminal who had the connections and the nerve to help plan something enormous. Sometime in late 1961, these four men began to build something inside the most surveilled facility in the United States. The cells in Alcatraz B block had a design vulnerability that the builders hadn't anticipated as a security risk. The ventilation ducts at the back of each cell were made of aging concrete that had been slowly corroding in the salty bay air for nearly 3 decades. Morris noticed this, and then he started digging. Using a simple metal spoon and later a makeshift drill fashioned from a modified motor stolen from a broken vacuum cleaner, the men began boring through the concrete around the air vents. They worked at night during the hours between lights out and the next scheduled head count. They concealed the holes with false panels made from cardboard and painted to look like the original wall. During the day, they were model prisoners, quiet, compliant, unremarkable. Meanwhile, behind those false panels, they were constructing a secret workshop space above the cell block, a crawl space where they could meet, plan, and assemble the tools they'd need to actually get off the island. Over the course of roughly 12 months, they collected more than 50 raincoats from fellow inmates. They stitched them together into a makeshift raft and life preservers, using a heat source improvised from prison steam pipes to vulcanize the seams and make them watertight. The result was surprisingly functional, tested in the showers when guards weren't watching. And then there was the masterstroke, the dummy heads. From a mixture of soap, toilet paper, and real human hair collected from the prison barbershop, they sculpted crude but convincing papier-mâché heads, lifelike enough to fool a guard doing a visual sweep of a darkened cell at 2 in the morning. They painted them flesh tones. They posed them just so under the blankets. These weren't props. They were the difference between 30 minutes of freedom and 30 seconds. After lights out on June 11th, 1962, 3 of the 4 men placed their dummy heads in their beds, squeezed through the holes in the back of their cells, climbed up through the utility corridor behind the cell block, and exited through a ventilation shaft onto the roof of the prison. The fourth man, Allen West, had spent the past weeks preparing his own escape route. But on the night itself, his cell vent wouldn't budge. The concrete hadn't broken through all the way. He worked frantically in the dark for nearly an hour before finally admitting he wasn't getting out. The other 3 men climbed down the north side of the building, scaled a fence, slipped down to the water's edge, and launched their homemade raft into San Francisco Bay. The next morning at 7:15 a.m., a guard noticed that the man in cell B 138 wasn't moving. He walked closer. He reached down and touched the head on the pillow. It was papier-mâché. Within hours, one of the largest manhunts in Bay Area history was underway. The FBI took jurisdiction. The Coast Guard combed the bay. Agents fanned out across California, then across the country. What they found in the water was suggestive, but not conclusive. A homemade paddle floating near the island, a deflated life vest, a waterproof bag containing personal items belonging to the Anglin brothers. No bodies, no confirmed sightings. The FBI investigated actively for 17 years before downgrading the case to inactive in 1979. The U.S. Marshal Service, however, never officially closed it. Technically, all 3 men are still classified as fugitives. The official FBI position, they almost certainly drowned. The water temperature was dangerously cold. The currents that night were running outward toward the open Pacific, not toward shore. Without proper equipment, the odds of surviving a crossing were slim. But here's what complicates that narrative. In 2014, a team of Dutch researchers used a sophisticated tidal simulation to model the exact conditions of that night. Their conclusion? If the men launched their raft around midnight, which was consistent with the timeline, the currents would actually have carried them directly toward the marine headlands, north of the Golden Gate Bridge. They wouldn't have been fighting the bay. They'd have been riding it. In 2013, a letter surfaced, allegedly written by John Anglin, addressed to the San Francisco Police Department. The writer claimed all 3 had survived, that 2 of the men were now dead of old age, and offered to turn himself in exchange for medical care. The FBI tested the letter. They could neither confirm nor rule out its authenticity. Family members of the Anglin brothers have periodically claimed to have received postcards and even Christmas cards from the brothers in the years following the escape. from locations in South America. None have been verified. In 2018, the U.S. Marshals released a digitally aged photograph of what the Anglin brothers might look like as elderly men and renewed the call for tips. Leads came in. None were confirmed. The case remains officially and practically unsolved. Here's the bitter irony. The 1962 escape wasn't the reason Alcatraz closed. The prison shut down just 1 year later, on March 21st, 1963, because it was too expensive to operate. Running Alcatraz cost nearly 3 times as much per prisoner as any other federal facility. The salt air was relentless, corroding pipes, crumbling concrete, eating through the infrastructure year after year. The island had no fresh water supply of its own. Every drop had to be shipped in. Attorney General Robert Kennedy ordered the closure. The last inmates were transferred off the island on that March morning, and the gates closed behind them. The guards went home, the lights went out, the rock went silent. Today, Alcatraz is one of the most visited tourist destinations in the United States. Over 1 million visitors per year make the ferry crossing to walk those corridors, peer into those cells, and imagine what it must have been like. The National Park Service runs it now. Cell B138, Frank Morris's cell, still has the hole in the back wall. They left it there on purpose. Some questions, it seems, are better left open. So, did they make it? 60 plus years later, we still don't know. And that ambiguity is exactly what makes this case one of the most compelling, unsolved mysteries in American history. Not a conspiracy theory, not a ghost story, a real, documented escape from a real, supposedly impenetrable prison with real evidence on both sides of the debate. Here's what I want to know from you. Do you think they made it? Drop your answer in the comments, survivor or drowned, and tell me why. I read every single one. If you're new here, this channel is where history, science, and genuine mystery intersect. We don't do clickbait, we do evidence. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. We're going deep on a case that makes Alcatraz look straightforward. See you in the next video.